This is the Paul McGuire Report. I'm Paul McGuire. Bible prophecy is unfolding. We have here in the United States of America tremendous political, social upheaval and turmoil. But simultaneously with those events, we see the beginnings of a new Middle East peace process. Now, these Middle East peace processes have occurred before. It's just that this time it looks like that some of the players behind the scenes potentially may have the power to bring about a peace in the Middle East, or should I say a peace between Israel and its Middle Eastern neighbors. Now, why this is of pivotal importance is that the entire skeletal framework, think of the Bible for a moment like a human skeleton, the frame of a human being. And as you go down the spinal cord of a human being, everybody knows what that looks like from posters and models and stuff. But the spinal cord that holds the Bible together, and this is something a lot of Christians don't fully understand and they don't fully appreciate it. And I'm not trying to be unnecessarily antagonistic, but if you do not properly understand the role of Israel in Bible prophecy, you can't understand Bible prophecy. Now, I know by saying that will anger people, and my objective is not to just indiscriminately anger people. I have better things to do. But I've met a lot of strong Christians, great Christians that God is using and has used in very powerful ways, who most likely would not agree with the theology that I just shared with you. They have a different take on it. We've touched on it in earlier programs. Now, the Bible tells us to rightly divide the Word of God. I don't like getting in unnecessary theological arguments with my brothers and sisters in Jesus Christ. Because why? It's not that I'm afraid to stand up for my position. As most of you know, I'm very good at advocating my position. But what happens is when you deal with a biblical topic like Israel, or the gifts of the Holy Spirit, or speaking in tongues, or the timing of the tribulation period, or is there a literal tribulation period, and on and on and on. There's so many important topics. Unfortunately, because we're all human and we all have a flesh, what happens is believers in Jesus Christ begin to debate and discuss these things in a mature, spirit-filled, brotherly and sisterly manner. But because of our flesh, and with our flesh goes ego and pride and short-tempered and the desire to be the one that knows it all, I'm not pointing at any fingers. I remember Dr. Francis Schaeffer saying this, and he was right on. What he said was, perhaps the profession with the most pride, where people love to debate and have the most pride and are the most convinced that they're right, Dr. Schaeffer said, was in the area of Christian or biblical theology. Schaeffer observed that there's no other discipline, there's no other field that he could think of where the level of pride was so monumental. And he was comparing it with, like secular lawyers, secular doctors, secular politicians. So we all know that in those fields, there's tremendous amount of competition, rivalry, the desire to be numero uno or whatever. One wouldn't expect it in the field of Christian theology, but as Schaeffer pointed out, theologians love to fight theologically, perhaps more than any other people he knew. Now, this isn't coming from me, Paul McGuire's perspective. This is the perspective of evangelical Christianity's greatest theologian and philosopher of the last 125 years, Dr. Francis Schaeffer. This was his observation, not mine. And he said theological arguments, theological pride, theological debates are among the most, they're the most filled with pride. They're the most vicious. The idea that you know it all, that your theology is supreme. It becomes a competition that is more aggressive. And I know it's hard for some of you to process this, but theology, you think with about a bunch of guys with glasses or ladies with glasses sitting in a studious university library with thousands of volumes of books, and you say, well, how aggressive could these people possibly be? Well, superficially, when you're comparing it to an ice hockey game or a Super Bowl or an aggressive basketball game or something like that, it seems like nothing compared to aggressive sports. I mean, nobody has to wear a helmet, et cetera, et cetera. But Schaeffer observed that in the area of the intellect, in the area of human intelligence, in the area of acquiring knowledge, there's a pride appeal this pride appeal is a very slippery, obtuse area of the flesh that is not often called out for what it is, which is it's the flesh, it's the fallen human nature. But in the area of intellectual disciplines, such as intelligence and knowledge and philosophy and theology and things like that, those are the areas, perhaps because they're transcendent areas, perhaps because they're areas and bodies of knowledge that deal with, for example, the meaning of life. Who is God? What are God's laws? The infinite. Perhaps because theology especially touches on the supreme being and knowing about the supreme being, that the temptation for incredible pride exists in those disciplines. So Schaeffer was saying that there's nothing more vicious, there's nothing more filled with pride than when theologians or Christian professors or whatever wage some kind of debate or theological war. It can be totally vicious. And as somebody who, I don't call myself a theologian, first of all, but as somebody who has traveled in theological circles and taught at a theological seminary and university and mixed with that culture, yeah, the pride level's intense because everybody thinks they're right, especially on these key issues. Okay, so the point is, I know many people who really love the Lord that God is using, and yet they would disagree with me on the emphasis I place on the children of Israel, the Jews, the physical land of Israel, the physical location of Jerusalem, and Israel's role in mankind's history, in God's interaction with mankind, and Israel's primary role at the end of the age. In the last days, it's Israel. Everything culminates around Israel. Now, some people would disagree with me. The only thing I would say is I have studied this area for decades. I have taught many, many courses at a very well-known Christian university and seminary. And the only reason I don't use the name is because I don't want it misconstrued that all the beliefs that I espouse are necessarily the same as the university and seminary that I have taught with and taught for decades. I don't want people to confuse my belief system with their belief system, because there are some differences. There's probably many similarities, probably the majority are similarities, but there's areas where we depart. And so, especially in the area of Bible prophecy, and it's done respectfully. All I will say to you is that my spiritual mentor was Dr. Jack Hayford, and he was the founder of the seminary and the college. And it was because of him I began teaching way back, decades ago, before it became a seminary and a university, fully accredited. It started out as simply a Bible institute, and I would teach regularly for years. And my main area of teaching areas that I taught in at that time it was called the Hayford Bible Institute, after Jack Hayford. And I would teach, it was a very popular class, and I would teach Bible prophecy. I would teach courses on Bible prophecy and Israel. I would teach courses on emotional healing, even though we changed the title of that because emotional healing had some baggage that nobody liked, including me. But basically, the courses I taught in emotional healing were not psychological courses. Emotional healing, the courses I taught in emotional healing were biblical courses on how to integrate Scripture into areas of your personality and struggles, like, forgiveness and anger and hatred, and how to become whole through renewing your mind with the Word of God and prayer and things like that. And then finally, I was a professor. The Hayford Bible Institute became very popular and kept expanding and expanding. And so as it expanded, it became a college, and then it became a university. And it's changed names, and it's now changed physical locations. It no longer is in the state that I'm in. And I'm not talking about state of consciousness. I'm talking about physical state, its location. But for many decades, I was a professor of eschatology, which means a professor of Bible prophecy, and ecclesiology, which is the study of the church and things like that. So, I have theological training. I've taught in seminaries, et cetera, et cetera. And I will tell you that despite what everybody thinks, it's a very competitive sport when it comes to issues. And I don't mind debating. I mean, for crying out loud, for those of you that know me, for over 10 years, I was a regular Fox News Network contributor and commentator on the biggest shows. And I was invited on not only Fox News Network, the biggest shows, but the Fox Business Network, the biggest shows. And I was invited on not as a, quote, Christian, but as a conservative who would debate aggressively, very aggressively, with a lot of knowledge. I would debate whatever topic they put forward, and I would debate, let's say, like liberal radio talk show hosts. And I was very aggressive and entertaining in my style of debating, and so I was constantly being invited on. So I can be very, very aggressive and a formidable debater. And this isn't bragging, but I never lost a debate on the Fox News Network. We had some close calls, we had some probably draws, but I never lost a debate. And it's not because I'm so brilliant, it's because I knew, see, a lot of the people I debated had huge, huge names. they were senators, they were publishers of major financial publications, like editors of the Wall Street Journal and stuff. Heavyweight economists and political thinkers and politicians and stuff, and sometimes heavyweight media personalities. And so I didn't have the name they had, especially in secular circles. So I couldn't rest on my laurels. I didn't have any laurels to rest on. So what I would do is I would super prepare. I would study the topic, because the producers usually, sometimes you get the topic, they would send a limousine either to my house, or Fox News would send a limousine to the radio studio that I broadcasted out of. And sometimes I would find out what the topic was going to be, talking on the cell phone to the producers of big shows on the Fox News network. I would be talking to the producer in the limousine on my cell phone, and that would be the first time I would find out what the topic was. And that's rough, because then they're sending you some notes of research, and you're trying to use your cell phone to get up to speed. And that's difficult. But most of the time, they would give you at least a day's notice, or maybe 4 hours notice, or sometimes, they'd give you like 3 days notice. And that would give me time to research. And because I wasn't resting on my laurels, I've learned over the years to be a speed reader, to just read and memorize data and statistics. So I would read the premier research from the most respected think tanks, etc. And I would just memorize pages of economic data. Okay. Because I'm debating with the main editor of the Wall Street Journal or Forbes magazine, or big shots. And so the only way I knew I would be taken seriously when the issue is whatever, the deficit or whatever, is that I had to try harder. See, they all had names. So because they had names, they rested on their laurels. They didn't really prepare specifically and spend lots of hours preparing for the debates. Neither did the liberal talk shows. They all were they were overconfident. But I knew I was the new boy on the block. I did not have an established name, unlike a lot of the people on my father, the people that would be on before me or after. Sometimes their father was, the former president of the United States of America. So that's the field I'm dealing with. And obviously my father is not the former president of the United States of America. My claim to fame is I'm a Christian radio talk show host. Yes, one of the largest Christian radio talk show host programs in the nation, on monstrous hours every day and week. But it's still, in the secular media world, there's a stigma if you're a Christian radio talk show host. Yet, because I delivered the goods when I came on, they allowed that. They don't really like that. And of course, I didn't speak Christianese when I debated. So I would usually win the debates because I'd memorize all the facts. I would know the deficit in terms of dollar terms. I would know the percentage of this and the percentage of that. I'd know how many billions we were spending on. I did a lot of debates. See, this is an interesting thing. I did a huge percentage of my debates were on the trade treaties and NAFTA and GATT and WTO. Okay. So, and this was 25 years ago. But Christians didn't even know what this stuff was, and the secular public didn't know what it was. But they had me on because They liked that. That was cutting edge because their people didn't pay attention to it. I mean, the editors of the Wall Street Journal and stuff, they weren't paying attention to the trade treaties. I was, because my interest, what I didn't say on the air blatantly, I said it covertly, but my interest was Bible prophecy, because the trade treaties I understood, 25, 30 years ago, that their purpose was to bring about a global economic system and a global government. And because of my study of the book of Revelation and my study of Bible prophecy, I had like a stealth, hidden advantage over them, because the Bible's true, historically, scientifically, economically. And the Bible predicts that in the last days, where the world, Babylon, Mystery Babylon, will return. It began at ancient Babylon at the time of the Tower of Babel. I've written about that in many of my books, and the book, The Babylon Code, one of the best-selling Bible prophecy books of all time, which I wrote and my co-author Troy Anderson wrote, and it dealt with the birth of the global system. And it's an excellent book. You should read it because it will really inform you. It's called The Babylon Code. It's one of the best-selling Bible prophecy books of all time. So because I was into that in a unique way, because I was studying Bible prophecy and I understood what ancient Babylon was. Babylon at the time of the Tower of Babel was the world's first new world order. It was the world's first one world government, one world religion, one world economic system. We explain that in the book, and I explain it in my other books, like A Prophecy of the Future of America. Okay, so the people I'm debating with, the liberal radio talk shows and television personalities, don't have a clue what ancient Babylon is about. I mean, I remember when I was in Manhattan doing research, staying at a hotel that was not all that far from Fox News Network. And Fox News knew that I was going to be in Manhattan. And so they gave me a call somewhat last minute or the day before or something. And they said, we want you to be on this new show. And it was a news show that aired both on the Fox News Network and the Fox Business Channel. And the news show had a new female host, very attractive female, probably 30-something, 34, 35, I would guess. But she was one of the top editors of the Wall Street Journal, graduate, big Ivy League school. She had all the credentials, probably came from a very wealthy family, none of which I had, okay? And so what was ironic, what was an irony was that we were discussing the global economy and stuff, and she's just basically spouting off the Council on Foreign Relations position and the Democratic position and the Republican position, which was not true, which was that America participating in the global economy by signing all these trade treaties would put more Americans at work. It would increase cash flow into America. It would be a huge benefit to the working class and the middle class. It would bring high-paying jobs back into the U.S. It would bring manufacturing back into the U.S. because that's what all the big-time Republicans and Democrats were saying, and that's what the Wall Street Journal and people like this girl was saying. Okay, well, I had to be polite because that's their talking position, but I didn't agree with that. So my point of view was respectful, but I took the opposite point of view. And the reason I took the opposite point of view is because of my intense study of Bible prophecy. You see, if I hadn't studied Bible prophecy for so many years, I could not have. The reason I had an unusual depth in my understanding of the global economic system, the global governance system, and I didn't talk about the global religion, but the global government and the global economic system. The reason I had a very unusual and in-depth understanding of it that gave me a huge advantage was, again, not because, I'm a genius or something. It's because they're biased, okay? They don't even, the Bible is not even remotely on their list of mandatory reading and research. But you see, because I had a biblical worldview, and this is what I'm talking about all the time on the Paul McGuire Report, you'd be surprised how often, if you bother to develop a biblical worldview, that means your ideas, your perceptions, et cetera, are formed by God's Word, and you learn how to integrate that into everyday life, you would be surprised that if you're walking with the Lord, how often the Lord will sovereignly and supernaturally lead you into situations that are very secular situations where there's really no anticipation on your part, nor would you want to bring up a Bible verse or a Bible prophecy, because that's probably, you start talking like that, that's probably going to be the end of your career. You'll be labeled a religious nut, especially if you're in the military or politics or economics, etc. Well, because I had studied this so intensively, I lived, breathed, and ate the global economic system and the global governmental system. And I understood very, very clearly that the trade treaties were designed to do an end run around the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and slam dunk America and the European Union into a one world economic system. And that the one world economic system was designed for the benefit of the globalist elite, the 1%, to make them filthy rich. And the way they were going to be filthy rich is that the trade treaties, which were promoting the global economic system, simply robbed the money out of the pockets of the working class and the middle class and put it into the 1% globalist elite. Okay, so this girl and all these people that I would regularly be on these different shows with, CNN included, because they were so privileged and came from such an elite background, which I didn't, they only knew what it was fashionable or politically correct for them to know, or what was allowable for them to know, because they all went to the same Ivy League schools like Yale and Harvard, etc. And as you know, that you have Marxist professors controlling the curriculum, and they have a very hermetically sealed curriculum where they will never touch the Bible or take it seriously. So there I am sitting down, and we're debating the trade treaties, etc. And I've done all the research that the official think tanks, including the Council on Foreign Relations, have put out. I've memorized the dollar amounts. I know the amount of jobs back then by memory, how many jobs were lost. I knew back then the economic loss to the middle class and the working class by memory, because I memorized it. I knew back then how many high-paying manufacturing jobs left America. I knew back then how many manufacturing plants and the dollar amount left America. Okay, I knew that, and the reason they didn't know it is because it wasn't a priority for them, because they had no basis for it being a priority, because their knowledge pool was only this secular elitist arena. Well, my knowledge pool included the Word of God and Bible prophecy. So as anybody who's read the Word of God and Bible prophecy, it tells us that in the last days, there will be the return of Mystery Babylon. Now, Mystery Babylon began and was first birthed in ancient Babylon under Nimrod at the time of the Tower of Babel. And it was the world's first one world government, one world religion, one world economic system. And it featured a social control mechanism and a way of controlling their people that is still being employed today. Okay, So the world's first one world economic system, one world religion, one world government, all began at ancient Babylon at this time in the Tower of Babel. And yet, God does not like this global system. He's very clear about the fact that this is that those that are behind the global system are, in a sense, waging war against him. So God comes down from heaven, and this is all outlined in the book of Genesis, chapter 11. God comes down from heaven to check out what's happening in ancient Babylon, and because he knows, God's omniscient, but it says he's heard that there are things that are against his will that are happening in ancient Babylon. So God comes down and he's making an evaluation regarding ancient Babylon and the Tower of Babel in order to decide whether or not he's going to judge ancient Babylon. Now, of course, these secular people, because I did, lots of debates for years over this topic of globalism and trade treaties, and Christians, by the way, at this time when I was on my own radio show, well, I'm still on my own radio show, but this was a different one with a lot of AM and FM stations. I mean, I would be screamed at by Christians hysterically all the time. I'm being accused of all kinds of things. I'm not asking for your sympathy. I'm just saying that's what I mean by being on the front lines. Not only are you attacked by the secular community, you're attacked by the Christian community viciously. And the reason is I was accused of making this stuff all up about Babylon and the global government and the global economic system and the Babylonian system, and because I did intensive research and study, I knew what I was talking about. But I would be accused of, McGuire is teaching this weird stuff. It wasn't weird, it was biblical. But you see, when you're on the front line, not only are you getting attacked from all these Soros-funded type hit groups that are attacking you all over the place and lying about you all over the internet, then on the other side, you're getting attacked by Christians who are accusing you of being a heretic, of claiming to be a prophet. And anybody who's ever listened to me knows that I've never claimed to be a prophet, and I always say that I am not a prophet. And then the lies, the worst lies, by the way, are not from the Soros-funded think tanks and hit groups. I get attacked all the time because I'll say something that is not designed to be controversial. But if you stand up for a biblical principle, if you advocate a biblical principle, you don't even have to say it's a biblical principle, but if you're advocating or standing up for a biblical principle in the secular media complex, you're a threat. So you're attacked because guys like Soros are spending hundreds of millions of dollars to attack anybody that dares to communicate a different position than the one they're advocating. And speaking of George Soros, I just read an article about him 2 days ago. He's very old. He's quite brilliant, by the way. And he said in this article that he is going to devote his final days to defeating nationalism and promoting globalism and a global government and a global economic system and a global society. So Soros has put us on notice that up until his dying day, whenever that will be, he is going to wage war against nationalism, and he's going to spend his fortune, and his fortune is probably in the trillions of dollars. He's going to spend his fortune bringing in a global government and a global economic system. And then he said, and even after he dies, because his economic assets are so enormous, he's going to, even after his death, he has set things up to continually fund a war on nationalism, a war on Americanism, and he's going to continually fund, after he dies, globalism, a global government, and a global society in a humanistic, atheist way. So that's what his goal is, and he does that now. Okay, so when I'm attacked by hit job think tanks and stuff financed by Soros and others, which I am, and I'm not trying to be antagonistic, but again, if you stand up and take a stand, and I'm not, I don't take I think about what stands I'm going to take a stand on. I'm not, I'm careful. I try to be strategic. I just don't shoot my mouth off. But when I believe it's appropriate and it's something of conscience, and I believe it's something the Lord wants me to speak up on, I will speak up on it. But I know ahead of time that I'm going to get attacked and humiliated and ridiculed. They'll take a video segment where I'm articulate, blah, 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 and there might be like 3 seconds where I have or 2 seconds where I have an odd facial expression. Well, that's the facial expression they'll turn into the picture for the article. Or they'll take stuff that I on video and they'll edit it out of sequence so it makes me sound weirder. But I wasn't weird. It was just they edited it so it made me sound weird. And then what they'll do oftentimes is they will literally, you can watch the video of me, and then they will put in writing a quote of what I said, which is weird. But the point is, if you bother to listen to the video that's right there, I never said it. So most of the time I'm attacked because they're taking stuff I'm saying out of context, or they're lying about what I said to begin with. It happens all the time. And fortunately, there's a lot of people like you out there who are supporters and partners of this ministry, and you defend me. And so somebody will make a comment, when I'm attacked. And those comments are important that you make them. And they said, why are you criticizing this guy, Paul McGuire? You're accusing him of saying something and attacking him of saying something that the writer wrote, probably a follower of this ministry. And then they said, he never said it. Your own video proves that he never said what you accused him of saying. You made it up. And they do make it up for sensationalism. So, but having said that, the attacks from the secular media or the Soros activist media, I would say that they operate, oddly enough, they operate with more integrity and more professionalism in their attacks than the majority of these Christian groups, whose lies, who actually lie, yet claim to be Christians. I mean, flat out lie, egregious lies, accusing me of saying things I've never said in my life, or accusing me of this and that, and they know it's not true, because the proof that what they're accusing me of, the proof that what they're saying is not true, is all over the internet. You could do a 3-second search and find out whether or not something they're accusing me of is true. And it's not. I mean, you could find out in 3 seconds. And it's just outrageous stuff. And the idea is to attack me, to marginalize me, to demonize me, to ridicule me. And most of all, and this is what and it's not just me, it's anybody who speaks out, Franklin Graham or whatever. The idea is to marginalize you and try to insert doubt between you and your supporters and the partners of your ministry. See, that's the real goal. If they can drive a wedge between people like me and the supporters and partners of my ministry, or Franklin Graham's ministry, or whoever, or Chuck Missler's ministry, the late Chuck Missler, then what they've done is they've stopped the flow of funds into the ministry, which makes it impossible for us to operate. So the reason I'm telling you this is it's not just me. Anybody who stands up for what is right and takes a solid position can expect a full-on attack. Now, many people, I could name names, okay? Chuck Missler's gone on to be with the Lord, okay? Many of you know who he is. To me, very, very respected Bible teacher, okay? We were friends. He used to come to the studio where I broadcast. I was friends with Chuck, friends with Nancy Missler, his wife. They both have gone on to be with the Lord. I helped to defend him because he was being attacked all the time. Hit articles, lies, and so many other people that I know, and I don't want to go through a list of names, but so many people that I know that most likely a large percentage of you either read their books, or you listen to them, or you watch them, or you follow their ministries, or whatever. And there are these groups that are attacking them because they want to drive, they want to demonize them so you won't support them and believe in them anymore. They want to destroy the credibility of these people in your eyes by lying. Okay, so you see, it's not like it was 30 years ago. 30 years ago, you would be attacked for standing up. Okay, I remember when I was basically a brand new Christian, but the Lord was blessing the Lambs Club, and thousands of people were coming to the Lord, and I was promoting and producing contemporary Christian music concerts on Broadway and Times Square. And guess who and so the news of this ministry, because it was on Times Square, because it was in a Broadway theater, attracted major media attention, national media attention from all the big networks and stuff. So I'm brand new in the Lord. So to just show you the deviousness, I'm brand new in the Lord. I'm leading people to the Lord and stuff. And somebody shows up, and they're allowed entrance into the Lambs Club facility, and it's a reporter, and the reporter, the motives of the reporter, he comes off like a lamb, but he's not really a lamb. And remember, I'm brand new to this whole game back then. I've only been saved a year. Well, a lot of you will remember his name, or it'll sound familiar. It was Bill Moyers. Bill Moyers was his name, it was as big as Dan Rather in his time. He was like a household name. Everybody knew Bill Moyers. He was a nationally known household name television broadcaster who was very, very liberal. And so at this time, he was with one of the networks. He later migrated to PBS, but he was with one of the networks. And so we're meeting and talking, and it's amazing how arrogant these people are. He's trying to act like a lamb, and a nice guy and stuff. I'm not sophisticated to his game because I'm, like I said, I'm barely saved. But I have street smarts from growing up in New York City, okay? And so that gives you kind of an instinct. So instinctually, and the Holy Spirit, I believe, warned me, it's probably the Holy Spirit working through my instinct and said, I didn't hear a voice, but I had this intuitive feeling, don't trust this guy. Be careful what you say. He wants to set you up, which he did. He asked me a bunch of questions, which were set-up questions, because he was trying to elicit from me an answer that would brand me and the entire ministry as a Jesus nut job, Jesus freak nut job, wacko, Christian fundamentalist cult member lunatic. Yeah, that's what his gig was. That's what he was trying to do. So he was phrasing his questions in such a way so that he could go back to the editing room. That's how they always do it. Go back to the editing room. And he was trying to he was baiting me and enticing me to get me to say something that he could edit and run with on a national news story that would tell his story, because he had already decided on what his story was before he arrived there, which is, we're a Christian cult, I'm poor, some, ex-hippie nut job, demonize us, take us down. We weren't political, just demonize us because he hated Christianity. And the reason he hated Christianity is he had some kind of Christian background and turned his back on it. So he baited me a number of times, and I kept my cool, and I was very calm. So he didn't have any footage to demonize with me. So he asked me this question, and he thought he was going to get a gold mine. He said to me, "Why do you do this? Why are you devoting so many hours of your life? Why is it so important for you that people, as you say," he's trying to pretend like he doesn't know what the words mean. He knows exactly what they mean. "Why is it important to you to, quote, win people to Jesus Christ? And what's the motive of all this money?" Well, my paycheck was so small. I mean, it was ridiculous. But I'm not going to tell him what my paycheck was. So the point was, I simply said to him, looked into the camera, and the Lord's grace was upon me, and I said to him, "The reason I'm doing this, Bill," I didn't call him Bill, I think I called him Mr. Moyers or something. "The reason I'm doing this," I said, "is not for money. It's not for fame. Nobody's getting rich here." I said, "It's because at one time I was an atheist, and when I accepted Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior, it completely changed my life." And when I said that with authenticity and sincerity, he looked like he saw a ghost. He didn't like it. It spooked him because there was a credibility about it. There was a truthfulness about it. And then I said, "We're doing this," I said, "because we love Jesus Christ. And we love God. And because we love Jesus Christ and we love God, we want to share that love of Jesus Christ with all the people in New York City who are hurting, who are empty inside, etc." And it wasn't a long sound bite. So by the grace of God, when he edited the piece and it ran nationally on one of the big networks, it was okay. I mean, God protected me because he wanted to hang me, and he didn't hang me. He let it play out. I guess the Lord touched his heart, so he had some integrity. He let it play out. So here I am, a real person, obviously sane. He could have found somebody on the street to twist the story. So even though he may have had a hidden agenda, he allowed it to air. And it was obvious we were rational people that love God, and that's why we were doing what we were doing. But that was my first experience with the snakes, the wolves in sheep's clothing, and the media. I didn't know back then, see, because I was very new to everything. I didn't know that he had a reputation of having a passionate hatred towards Christians and Christianity and Bible-believing Christians. I didn't know. Had I known that, I don't know if I would have done the interview with him. But God's grace was there. The point I'm trying to make here is that when you stand up for Christ in today's public arena and world, look at how the media has changed just since 2016. There are shows I would never do that I used to do all the time, both on what you would call the moderate conservative cable news networks and a lot of, well, I wouldn't go on CNN anymore. They used to invite me on. I wouldn't go because it's completely rigged. I mean, it is completely unfair. You don't have a chance in anything. And see, when I went on, if I could win the debate, they would allow me to win the debate. Now, I was on mainly Fox and Fox Business Channel. CNN didn't like it. They would grudgingly allow you to win the debate, but at least they would allow you to win the debate if you won it. And I always won the debate because I prepared. But it's not like that anymore. It's a closed circle. They won't allow you to win the debate. They only want to make a fool out of you, and if you won't play ball with that, they're not interested. The other thing is that they have an agenda, and they'll just chew you up. And the other thing, if you notice, and this is on the big conservative, moderate news network, it used to be that they would have really sharp radio talk show hosts that were conservatives and stuff. Like, I don't want to sound, overly happy with myself, but I was in that pool. Really sharp, aggressive, debating conservative talk shows. They don't have that anymore. If you notice carefully, you know why? They did it on purpose. They only want people that they can control. They only want people that will not go into areas of the forbidden zone of, like, you can't really. So one of the rules I learned early on is you cannot discuss who the Federal Reserve System is. You can't explain how the Federal Reserve System operates. You can call it the Fed. You can refer to the Federal System, Reserve System, but God help you if you, in 3 minutes, break it down. They don't want their audiences to know what that is. And there's many topics that are taboo. So I don't do a whole lot of these shows anymore because they're so Orwellian, they're so rigged. All of them, by the way. You look just carefully, and I'm trying not to name the name, but of the conservative, moderate news network, they used to have a lot of, you have your main people that work at Fox full time, and then you have their celebrity guests like Rudy Giuliani and stuff. And then there's the people that are very gifted in debating, etc., who are usually the independent radio talk show hosts or authors, etc. If you notice, with very few exceptions, they have completely gutted out all the guests that are really knowledgeable or might offer a perspective that's outside of their box. They want to totally control everything. So what you have, look carefully, use your perception, observe carefully the people that they have on regularly. And this is the same with CNN and Fox News Network and Fox Business Channel, etc. The majority of the so-called experts now are kind of lame, they're tame, they're bland, they're not too deep, they're not very interesting, and that's what they want. They want it to be very dumbed down. And I'm not interested in doing that. See, so don't think that these other networks are so truthful. They're not. You're not allowed on if they want somebody who's going to play the stooge, to be blunt. And if you shake up the mold and ask some really intelligent questions that they don't want asked, I'm not talking about acting like a nut. They don't want that. They want dumbed down stooges, and there's a lot of dumbed down stooges. I'm not saying they don't have good guests. They do, but they're in a small percentage. Okay, so having said that, studying Bible prophecy gave me an advantage on all these shows, on being on the History Channel many times, because I studied ancient Babylon and Genesis 11, which most Christians would not study today, and most seminaries and most churches and most Bible study groups, they would never read Genesis 11. Genesis 11 is an account of ancient Babylon. Okay? If you study it, it teaches you a lot about global economics, global religion, and a global governmental system, because it's the first place where Mystery Babylon is introduced in the Bible. And Mystery Babylon was the spiritual system, the economic system, the political system that Nimrod used to rule Babylon during the time of the ancient Tower of Babel or Babel. So when you read Genesis chapter 11, and this is the kind of reading Well, these news people are all biased against this. They have a prejudice. They'll never look at the Bible as a source book or as research. So the bottom line is, if you're cutting your nose off to despite your face, which is what you're doing, when you're cutting your legs off and your arms off and your nose off because you have a bias and a prejudice against the history that is contained in the accurate manuscript called the Bible. Because let's just forget for a moment that the Bible is God's word and it's a spiritual book. Let's just forget that for the sake of argument. The Bible also happens to be the most reliable historical textbook in existence, because every sentence, every word in the Bible, especially because of the ancient Jewish Hebrew scribes, they meticulously copied the Bible down from verse to verse. They didn't have printing presses, etc. And so the Hebrew scholars meticulously and with unusual care preserved the historical as well as the spiritual message. The same thing with the men who wrote down the New Testament, the history of what happened with Jesus, what happened with Jerusalem, etc., etc. The Bible is a multidimensional book, and it is an impeccable historical document that deals with teaching us about the economics, the governmental systems, the law, the social systems, the customs of different time periods. There's no other book that is as accurate as the Bible. But you see, you have a prejudice in all these Ivy League universities that groom, let's call them the elite people, to occupy the positions of. You'll find that a lot of the people who are not all of them, but a lot of the people that are the big time radio talk show hosts, the big time television talk show hosts and commentators on the cable news networks and the networks, and who write for like the New York Times and Washington Post and stuff, they all have the same pedigree. They come from upper class elite families economically, and they went to Ivy League schools. So that's where their education comes from. But because they have a bias and prejudice, and that prejudice is reinforced in all of those schools, all of those Ivy League schools that churn out the Barack Obamas, that churn out the George Bush Jr., George Bush Sr., John Kerry, all these people, the elite that govern our nation are all mass-produced out of Ivy League schools, okay, that have a bias and a particular worldview. So it would never be part of their curriculum to study the Bible. And I'm not saying that they should be studying the Bible for spiritual reasons in a economic class or a geopolitical class, but it would be more than appropriate to study the Bible as a viable historical document dealing with economics and global governance, because it's true, it's accurate, and it's historical. Okay, so I'm not biased against the Bible. I don't have a prejudice against the Bible. So I have, in this verbal fight and these debates on television, I have a huge advantage over them, and they don't even know it. The advantage I have over them, and it's topsy-turvy to what you might think. I didn't graduate from Yale or Harvard or the other Ivy League schools. Okay? That opens a lot of doors. But so the bad side is that happens to be the ticket in to elite level jobs. Okay? But because I was not exposed to that bias and prejudice of the Ivy League schools, because I got saved miraculously at the University of Missouri, I had no qualms about reading the Bible. So I have the advantage when I'm debating with them. I have a huge advantage, and that is I understand on a level they couldn't possibly understand the dangers, the problems of a new world order, a globalist system, a global government, a global religion, and a global economic system. Because I'm reading a history book that they won't touch with a 10-foot pole because they're blinded, they're prejudiced against it. Okay? I read it and I'm able to gain a treasure full of knowledge, and knowledge is power. And what I've learned from the Bible in terms of economics and geopolitics and global governance, etc., what I've learned from the Bible gives me an enormous and overwhelming advantage when I write, when I debate, when I give conferences, when I do interviews, because I'm not just pulling from the same hack job information that they have. So I'm talking about the trade treaties, etc. But you see, my perspective is different than all of theirs. They're all secretly for the trade treaties. The Wall Street Journal and the girl who was the head of this show when I was in New York and they had me on, Fox had me on. She, of course, is a graduate of one of the Ivy League schools. She's an editor with the Wall Street Journal, which is pro trade treaties. This is like 25 years ago. So I'm not going to tell her why I know what I know, but in the core of my being, in addition to all the up-to-date research that I did on the WTO, World Trade Organization, NAFTA, GATT, the trade treaties, the economic disparities, all the stuff, I memorize all those facts, but I have this foundation of knowledge that she's never been, and their whole staff and their reporters and the people I debate with have never been exposed to in their life because of their bias. So part of my education comes from the Bible. So in Genesis chapter 11, it talks about the Tower of Babel. Okay, they think the Tower of Babel is like Disneyland, but they don't believe it's real. So this is how it begins in Genesis chapter 11, verse 1. Now the whole earth had one language and one speech. And it came to pass, as they journeyed from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. Then they said to one another, Come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly. They had brick for stone, they had asphalt for mortar, and they said, Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower whose top is in the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth. But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower that the sons of man had built. And the Lord said, Indeed, the people are one. They all have one language. This is what they begin to do. Now nothing that they propose to do will be withheld from them. Come, let us go down there and confuse their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of all the earth, and they ceased building the city. Therefore its name is called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth, and from there the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of all the earth. Okay, so we see that God comes down to ancient Babylon while they're building the Tower of Babel, and God observes that they're one. Well, what does that mean? He explains it in detail. It means they're one in their purpose, their plans, and pursuits. It also means is that Babylon, ancient Babylon, and the Tower of Babel was the world's first New World Order, by the way. Very important to know. That's what Mystery Babylon is all about. It's the world's first New World Order. It's the world's first one world government, one world religion, one world economic system. So God sees that. He says the people are becoming one. When you read Genesis 11, it becomes obvious that the inhabitants of Babylon, as well as the leader of Babylon, Nimrod, were vehemently against nationalism. They did not want nationalism. Sound familiar? They did not want nationalism. What they wanted was what the elite want today. They wanted globalism. They wanted a global government, a global economic system, and a global religion where all the people would be one. So everybody goes, well, what's wrong with that? Well, let's look at God's perspective. God warns that this is very dangerous. He said, because they're functioning as one, they're unified. So he said, because they're functioning as one, anything that they propose to do, that they plan to do, they'll be able to do. In other words, because they're unified, because they're one, whatever they plan to do, they will be able to do. That's the benefit of operating in unity. So why is God upset? Because God is looking into their hearts, and he sees that in the hearts of the men and women of ancient Babylon, in the hearts of Nimrod, and in the heart of the entire Babylonian system and the Tower of Babel. What was the Tower of Babel, for crying out loud? It was an ancient astrological worship tower where the inhabitants of Babylon would literally climb the steps of this massive tower, which in an architectural basis was pyramidically shaped, which is called a ziggurat. And they physically felt like they were stepping into the heavens when they climbed to the top of the tower to worship their false gods. Well, climbing into the top of the heavens on an architectural basis, they felt they were becoming like God. They felt that the higher they went, they were stepping into God's territory. So God knew that this was not just a symbolic exercise, that at the core of their religious belief, it was a satanic belief, because Nimrod was a Luciferian. The entire Babylonian system is built on the premise that man, following Lucifer's footsteps, wants to become like God, and that's what Babylon was about. So that's why they wanted to climb high up into the tower. They wanted to be like God, and this unity would allow them to do it. And God could see that this new world order of ancient Babylon, also known as Mystery Babylon, at the heart of it was the inner desire of the men and women who inhabited ancient Babylon. It was a Luciferian desire. It's the same desire of humanism, to become God. So in their hearts, they were building Babylon, they were building the Tower of Babel to fulfill a Luciferian desire, which was to become like Lucifer, to become like gods. So God understood very clearly that this massive construction, this massive activity that was occurring in ancient Babylon was in reality all being done for the purpose of creating a global system which would allow man to become God, which would allow Lucifer's servants like Nimrod and eventually the Antichrist to become like God. And the whole purpose of let's remember that ancient Babylon is the first prototype of the New World Order, and the whole purpose of the New World Order is to create the kingdom of heaven on earth without God, and to replace God with man, specifically an Antichrist or somebody like Nimrod. So God understood very clearly that this was really all about man wanting to become God. It's part of the ultimate Luciferian rebellion. Okay, so what's the takeaway from that? The takeaway from that is that the entire Mystery Babylon is composed of three parts: the one world religion, which the Pope is promoting, the one world economic system, which will have a microchip implant, and the one world government. Get rid of all the independent nation states, destroy nationalism, brainwash people to hate nationalism, and the world will become one, like John Lennon sang, the late Beatle. So this is the driving force. So when I'm on Fox and doing these other things in a secular arena, I choose, depending upon where I am and how up to speed they are and what kind of doors are open, that's how I select my approach. So when I was debating with them about the trade treaties and the global economic system, et cetera, with the editors of the Wall Street Journal, et cetera, obviously I just don't plunge into ancient Babylon and the Tower of Babel and all that stuff. It's too intense. They can't handle it, and they'll turn off your mic. But I come from a biblical worldview, so I know that the end game, that man's end game for a one world government and a one world economic system, is not good for mankind. Now, I'm not going to give them a biblical. You say, why don't you? Because they'll cut the mic off, and that'll be the end of it. I can do that on the History Channel. I can do it on more extended interviews, but I can't do it on these hard news shows. But it gives me a foundation, which is I don't trust globalism. I don't trust a global economic system. Why? Because the Bible warns that it eventually will turn into Mystery Babylon, and it will be the platform which allows the Antichrist to rule and reign planet Earth. It will, and the Antichrist will rule planet Earth by incorporating what the false prophet, who's the head of the one world religion, and that is by implementing a cashless society utilizing a microchip implant, plugging everybody's minds into the hive mind or world brain, and total surveillance state, the eye in the top of the pyramid, and the all-seeing eye of Lucifer, and so when you talk about economics, remember, the person I'm talking to just went to Yale or whatever. They have no real depth. So they don't know that that globalism, like communism, always produces totalitarianism, always produces an attack on God and Christianity, always produces an attack on private property and freedoms, and always, if you study the Babylonian system in detail, which I have, and I talk about it in all my books, and each book builds upon another. When you understand the dynamics of the Babylonian system, it is a Luciferian control system to enslave man. That's exactly what it is, because its purpose is to set up a global government, allow the Antichrist to rule as a false Christ, and the other control mechanism is to have everybody give up their cash and accept a microchip or nanochip implant, total surveillance. You can't buy or sell without accepting the mark of the beast. In order to accept the mark of the beast, you have to reject biblical Christianity, reject Jesus as your Savior, and you have to pledge to worship the Antichrist, which is what the Pope or whatever and the one world religion will offer. So you see how the Bible speaks so intelligently on these things? It's just a matter of being very careful, very managerial. You see, you have to be a manager of the truth. You just can't blurt out everything that you know in certain environments because it's too much. But that is the dynamics that we're dealing with. So, having said this, when you read the Bible, we have heard of the president's announcement of initiating a peace treaty in Jerusalem between Israel and the PLO and other Islamic states. Now, let us remember, once again, the depth of our understanding regarding the Middle East peace process should be far deeper than somebody who doesn't read the Bible because they're biased from information. By the way, every one of these Ivy League schools, as I point out in my book, The Greatest Battle for the Hearts and Minds of Mankind in the History of the World, every one of these Ivy League universities, every single one of them, when they were first formed, most of them were formed in the 1700s or the late 1600s, okay? They were all founded by Pilgrims and Puritans. So every Ivy League university was founded by Bible-believing Pilgrims and Puritans who trained. The whole purpose of every Ivy League school in the beginning was to train up people for the ministry, for evangelism, for Bible teaching, to spread the gospel around the world. That is the reason why universities like Harvard and Yale and others were created. They were created by fervent, Bible-believing preachers, Pilgrims, and Puritans for the purpose of equipping men to preach the gospel around the world. That was their entire purpose. Okay? Now, these same Ivy League schools today, because Christians have abandoned their responsibilities to occupy until he comes, all of these Ivy League schools today, 200 plus years later, are doing the exact opposite of what they were created and designed to do by the Pilgrims and Puritans who were strong Bible-believing Christians. Let's remember that Yale and Harvard and so many other of these Ivy League schools were founded by ministers, pastors who were Pilgrims and Puritans for the purpose of raising up missionaries and evangelists and pastors. That was the exclusive reason for their creation. And then academics came along with it. So think of everybody coming from the most powerful educational centers of our nation and then going on to be president, which is exactly what happened. They had a biblical worldview. God's people abandoned their responsibility in this area. 200 plus years later, we have these same Ivy League schools are aggressive promoters of everything that is designed to destroy Christianity, to destroy nationalism, to destroy Christian morals. And these Ivy League universities are designed now on purpose to indoctrinate students in secular humanist thought, socialism, Marxism, atheism, globalism, a new world order. So everything they're studying and everything they're being trained to do is now the exact opposite. It's 180 degrees opposite from the original intent when they were originally founded in just 200 plus years. Think about that for a moment. Think about that. That is not the will of God. That came about because Christians decided to disobey God, decided not to occupy the land, decided to be slothful and lazy, and that's the consequence. Now, the important thing here, though, is that when you look at the Bible, the skeletal structure of the Bible from Genesis to Revelation is the story of the children of Israel and the Jews. You cannot rip that out of the Bible and have the Bible make any sense. Anybody who says God is finished with the Jews don't have a right to the land, the church has replaced Israel, and all the other kind of add-ons that you hear, and I mean this respectfully, I'm not trying to attack people or whatever. You don't understand what God is saying in His Word regarding the children of Israel and the purpose of the Jews. Because you can't make a biblical argument that God is finished with the Jews, which is the common biblical argument, because of their present-day immoral, idolatrous condition. Because, let's be honest, America is supposedly a Christian nation, and it is immoral and idolatrous. So, the point is that the through line of the Bible is Israel and the Jews. It didn't stop when Jesus came with the birth of the church. Okay? This is critical to understand this. Israel, the birth of Jerusalem, the return to Israel in 1948 is God's prophetic super sign, which happened in 1948. When you study Bible prophecy, and you read the Gospels and Jesus Christ and the spreading of the gospel by the disciples, etc., and then you assuming you've previously read the account of Israel being delivered from Pharaoh in Egypt, Israel being supernaturally delivered here and there, the account of Israel, the covenant that God made with Abraham, the Abrahamic covenant, where God told Abraham that he would give the physical land of Israel to the physical descendants of Abraham as an everlasting covenant. And everlasting means it's everlasting. There's nothing the Jews can do, nothing. There's nothing the Jews can do to forfeit their God-given right to the land, to the physical land of Israel and Jerusalem. You really have to read the Bible properly here and not just go off on a tangent. Because you see, God says in several places that the covenant he made to give Abraham and his physical descendants the physical land of Israel is an everlasting covenant, and everlasting means everlasting. That means there's nothing the Jews can do in terms of immorality, idolatry, or whatever that will cause them to permanently lose their God-given inheritance and right to possess the land of Israel and Jerusalem in an everlasting covenant. Now, it's true, there are a multiplicity of covenants in the Bible. And each covenant, like a legal covenant or contract, is slightly different. So we have the Davidic covenant that God made with King David and his descendants. We have the Mosaic covenant. And every one of these covenants have slight modifications. So it's true when you read the account of the Jews in history that when they worshipped idols, when they broke the laws of God, when they became immoral, God often punished the children of Israel by putting them into exile, having their enemies come and capture them in Israel, take them as captives, and then make them slaves in foreign nations as God's way of punishing and judging the children of Israel for their sinfulness. So in the story of Daniel, the Jews are in Babylon in captivity because they violated the Sabbath. And that's all played out in the story of Nehemiah, etc. And then they're released from captivity and they can go back and rebuild the temple and rebuild Jerusalem. And then there are other accounts, like when the children of Israel are in captivity in Egypt because they violated the Sabbath, and they're in slavery and captivity in Egypt under Pharaoh for over 400 years until God sends a deliverer, Moses, and Moses supernaturally delivers the children of Israel. The children of Israel they don't deserve to be delivered. Not only were they practicing immorality in Egypt and worshiping false gods in Egypt, but when Moses delivered them or attempted to deliver them, they rebelled against Moses. And when Moses went up to get the Ten Commandments, what did the children of Israel do? They made a golden calf and they held an occult and sexual orgy around the golden calf. Did they deserve to get the promised land? No. And that's why God took them the long way to march into the promised land. He made them walk the long way so the unbelieving generation would actually die off wandering in the wilderness, and the generation with faith would inherit the promised land. So we see a continual pattern where the Jews are driven from their promised land, Israel, or the land of Canaan, as punishment. And that's the basis that people say, well, the Jews are disobedient and they've lost the land. That is partially true, but it's also not true. This cycle of being driven from the land, punished, going into captivity with the Jews, happens in cycles, and it's a product of the Mosaic covenant and other covenants. So yes, it's true. They can lose the land. However, in the long-term perspective, and this is the key, when you read a contract or a covenant, you have to look at the long-term perspective. In the long-term perspective, God comes to Abraham and he gives them a different kind of covenant, which is called an everlasting covenant. That's the difference between the Mosaic covenant and the other covenants. God is promising the physical descendants of Abraham a forever covenant, an everlasting covenant, which means they're going to get the land of Israel, the physical land of Israel, the physical land of Jerusalem, as an everlasting possession, which means it cannot end. So the difference between the Abrahamic covenant and the other covenants is that with the Abrahamic covenant, they cannot lose the land if they're idolatrous and immoral. It's an everlasting covenant. It doesn't mean they won't be punished. It doesn't mean they won't be chastised by God and judged by God, because they will be, in the same way that God judges and chastises his children, Christians, when they're idolatrous and immoral. So the point is that in the everlasting covenant, God means everlasting. It's without end. And that's the proper interpretation, and the difference between the Abrahamic covenant and the other covenants is the Abrahamic covenant is an everlasting covenant. It's without end. And therefore, it cannot be, in other words, God can't say, oh, the Jews are immoral, they're idolatrous, etc., etc. Therefore, as punishment, I'm going to remove their guarantee of possessing the physical land of Israel. No, because in that covenant, specifically the Abrahamic covenant, God designates it as everlasting. Okay, so today we know that Israel, for the most part, like much of Christendom in America, is immoral, it breaks the laws of God, and is idolatrous. The Jews are suffering because of that. And when you read Bible prophecy, you see that after the Jews turned their back on their Messiah, Jesus, after he was crucified, God, in his dealings with the Jews, then in the new covenant, God reaches the Gentiles, the non-Jews. And the apostles were raised up to reach both the Jews and the non-Jews. And so for about 2,000 years, since Christ ascended and the church was born, when the Holy Spirit was poured out on the church on the day of Pentecost, for 2,000 years plus, God's primary workings and salvation to mankind has been conducted through the church. Those that are saved, those that are filled with the Holy Spirit. And so this 2,000-year period, beginning on the day of Pentecost up to the present moment, we're in what's called the church age. So God's dealings with mankind, God's efforts of redemption towards mankind are done through his church. But the Bible, and that lasts until, quote, the church age ends. And then what happens? Well, what happens is God is certainly not finished with the Jews, not finished with Israel. The church does not replace Israel. This is not in the Bible. What happens is at the end of the church age, God then shifts back his dealings with the world by using the Jews once again. Because the tribulation period, which comes at the end of the church age, and we're not at the end of the church age yet. We're approaching the end of the church age, but we're not at the end of the church age yet. So the tribulation period begins when the Antichrist comes. And I don't want to get into a debate as to the timing of the rapture, whether it's pre-trib, which means the church is raptured before the Antichrist is revealed, or mid-trib, which means the church is removed from the earth 3.5 years into a 7-year tribulation period, or a post-tribulational rapture, which means that the church will be here for the entire tribulation period and then raptured at the same time as the second coming. And there's many, many variations as to the timing of the rapture. The point is that God's prophetic supersign, something happened when the Jews rejected their Messiah, Jesus. Yeshua, as punishment for that, God judged Israel, and the Roman general Titus invaded Jerusalem not that long after Jesus ascended into heaven. And before Jesus ascends into heaven, he's giving a lecture to his disciples with the Herod's temple, the Jewish temple, behind his disciples. And he tells his disciples prophetically that not one stone will be left upon another regarding Herod's temple. And they said, what are you talking about? Because it was a huge, magnificent structure. So Jesus then ascends into heaven. And the two angels that are there say he's going to return in the same manner that he ascended. So he ascends into heaven, and he will descend from heaven when he returns. So the point is that as Jesus prophesied, a number of years after he ascended into heaven, the Roman general Titus invades Jerusalem and Israel. The Roman soldiers rip the temple apart, brick by brick, piece by piece, set it on fire. All the gold in the temple is running like rivers of liquid gold in the cobblestones and streets of Jerusalem. And the entire Jewish temple is decimated. Not one brick is left on top of another, exactly as Jesus predicted. The temple was totally destroyed, precisely as Jesus Christ predicted supernaturally, in advance of it happening. And then at that time, huge numbers of Jews died and slaughtered when the Romans came in. And then for the Jews that were living, the Roman army and the Roman general sold those Jews that were still alive after the great slaughter and destruction of the temple, Herod's temple. They were sold into slavery into the four corners of the world. They were scattered or dispersed throughout the world to serve as slaves, etc. So this went on for approximately 2,000 years, okay? This dispersion of the Jews, which was all prophesied by Old Testament prophets. But all these Old Testament prophets also said that in the last days, God would supernaturally return the Jews to Jerusalem and Israel in the last days. So think about this. The Jews are scattered throughout the world. They were scattered throughout Europe, too. The Holocaust was horrific. Adolf Hitler killing like 7 million, 6 million Jews and many Protestants through the Holocaust. And then it was because of the horror of the Holocaust, the world community, including Rothschild and others, purchased and made a deal to send the survivors of the Holocaust by boat, to send them by boat in like an exodus to Israel and Jerusalem, so that the Jews could find refuge and safety, and so they were given back the physical land of Israel. They were given back, which is exactly what the ancient prophets said. And they started to return in 1947, and then in 1948, Israel was officially reformed as a nation after 2,000 years of dispersion. They were returned to the land. This is a prophecy made by numerous Old Testament prophets. It's all over the Old Testament that the Jews would return to the land of Israel in the last days. It's a huge fulfillment of Bible prophecy. So in 1948, that miracle happened. Then there was a series of wars and battles. There was the 1967 Six-Day War, or Yom Kippur War, where the Jews actually recaptured most of Israel and recaptured all of Jerusalem, the city of Jerusalem, including the place where the dome of the mosque, the Islamic mosque, is there. Technically, the Jews conquered it, in the 1967 Six-Day War. They could have kept it, but they decided to split it up in order to keep like World War III from happening. But the point is, the prophecy that the Jews would return to the land of Israel in the last days was fulfilled in 1948. And that's also a fulfillment of the Abrahamic covenant, which says that the Jews would be given the land of Israel as an everlasting covenant. So since the time that the Jews have been in Israel, it's been a nightmare for them. All the surrounding nations, most of them are militant Islamic. They hate Israel. I mean, Iran hates Israel. Most of the nations hate Israel. They've been under continual threats by the PLO, etc., and terrorist organizations that have said we want to destroy Israel. We want to drive Israel into the sea, which means we want to send in our armies and drown all the Jews, murder them all. There are threats of nuking Israel and killing every Jew that exists. I mean, these are serious threats. And so Israel and Jerusalem has been the center of the cyclone ever since they've returned in 1948. Israel rebuilds up their military, etc., etc. The United States of America is Israel's only friend, and it's kind of a half-hearted friend. The world community is generally against Israel via the United Nations. And then we hear another announcement of a peace plan that surfaced today, where the Trump administration and Jared Kushner, Trump's son-in-law, floating a proposal for a peace plan where theoretically the nations that are the enemies of Israel will theoretically agree to stop threatening, stop planning to destroy Israel, stop attempting to wipe Israel off the face of the map, and theoretically these militant Islamic nations will agree to acknowledge the right and existence of Israel to live in Jerusalem and Israel. Now, the price tag in the deal is that the intention and the plan is to divide up Jerusalem, especially, and other areas where you will have the land of Israel and Jerusalem, but it will be like a two-state solution. So you will have the Israel that's controlled by the state of Israel, and that involves certain land, and I'm sure it involves certain land where the Temple Mount is. And then you have the other state, and I haven't heard the formulation. The other state most likely will consist of an alliance of Islamic Middle Eastern nations, and it very possibly could involve the Vatican at some point, monitoring or administrating the two-state solution, and it could possibly involve NATO, the United States, EU, or whatever, administering a two-state solution. But in any case, you're definitely going to have Israel as one of the states, and you will have an alliance of Middle Eastern, primarily Islamic nations, as the other state. But somebody's got to administer and govern this peace process and this two-state solution. So there has to be some kind of policing force. And I haven't read the proposal, but I've read the previous proposals of a two-state solution. And in all the previous proposals of a two-state solution, there is some kind of military force, whether it's a blue-helmeted UN force, whether it's an EU force, whether it's a international force of some kind that consists of the United Nations. The proposal is the way they intend to solve it is to acknowledge the existence and right of both entities. When I say entity, I'm talking about one, the Jewish people and Israel, their right to the land and their right to Jerusalem, and to acknowledge the right of the Palestinian and Islamic nations to live and have commerce and business and homes and the right to live in different areas of Israel and Jerusalem. Now, it sounds great, right? But it's potentially very problematic. Whether this is administered to by a Democrat or a Republican, it's a very problematic solution. Because you see, underneath the surface of this so-called peace deal, you have very intense emotions and religious, spiritual, theological beliefs. So, for example, there's a significant percentage, especially among the militant, terrorist Islamic nations, that Israel has absolutely no right to the land whatsoever. And so the only thing that can be done is to destroy them and to drive them into the sea. Now, so you can have all the outward appearances of a peace process, but if what's really going on underneath the surface is this virulent strain of ideological, theological belief that the Jews must be destroyed, that's not going to be a lasting peace. It's set up to self-destruct. So you have that problem, and then you have Bible prophecy, and you have the prophecies from thousands of years ago. So here's how it plays out. That belief that Israel does not have a right to the land and that they need to be destroyed is still very prevalent among many Middle Eastern nations. It's hidden from the surface, but it's there. Now, there is a theological belief in some percentages of Islamic nations. It's a theological interpretation. They don't all share this theological interpretation, but a significant number share a theological interpretation borrowed from the teachings of Muhammad, the Prophet Muhammad, and the Quran, where the Prophet Muhammad teaches that it is allowable in situations like this, that it is permissible, according to the Prophet Muhammad, and there's a term for it, I forgot it off the top of my head, but according to the Prophet Muhammad, it is allowable for Muslims in intense negotiations like this regarding Israel to outwardly lie, if you will, or pretend or act as if their goal is peace, as if their goal is to be happy with the two-state solution. That according to some interpretations of the Prophet Muhammad, that's fully allowable if that gains you the time you need to build up your forces and militarize and set yourself up for the total destruction of your enemy, which in this case means you fake like, I'm just putting it in street language, you fake like you're interested in peace, you fake like a two-state solution makes you happy, etc., etc. You go through the outward motions of obeying all the rules and regulations of the two-state solution. So it appears that everybody's happy. But according to some interpretations of the Prophet Muhammad's teachings, it's allowable for those dedicated to Islam or Muslims to outwardly fake this adherence and obedience to peace for the purpose of buying time, for the purpose of strategy, so that you kind of put your enemies asleep and it gives you the time to build up your military and your forces so that you can accomplish your real agenda, which is to totally destroy Israel and to totally overwhelm Israel by Islamic nations and to totally wipe Israel off the face of the map. In other words, when you read the teachings of Muhammad, he teaches a principle where this kind of strategy is allowable. Okay? That kind of strategy you don't find in the Bible. So people with a superficial knowledge of militant Islam would be suckered. They would go along. All these nations, they want peace. We can trust them. Well, can you really trust them? How do you know that they do not interpret the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad in this more militaristic way, where Muhammad, according to some interpretations, says it's okay to masquerade and pretend to be for peace if it buys you time to gain strength so you can destroy your enemy? How do you know? You don't know. But you have to take those teachings seriously. And so that's the danger. The other danger is that in Bible prophecy, the tribulation period, or the time of Jacob's trouble, is when the Antichrist comes. And one of the ways the Antichrist comes into power is he promises to create peace in the Middle East between Jerusalem, Israel, and its neighbors. So the Antichrist offers up a peace treaty that appears to work. The Antichrist is seductive and gains acceptance by the world and acceptance by the Jews because he promises to solve the Middle Eastern peace problem between Israel and the Islamic states. So he signs a peace treaty with Israel. Israel is thrilled. This is according to the Bible. Israel's thrilled with this peace process. But what happens is it's a 7-year peace treaty. But 3.5 years into this peace treaty that Israel signs with the Antichrist, 3.5 years into the peace treaty, the Antichrist breaks the peace treaty and betrays Israel. And then this is the same time where the Antichrist, because under the Antichrist rule, Israel will be allowed to rebuild their temple, reinstitute the animal sacrifices. So 3.5 years into the peace treaty, the Antichrist breaks and violates the peace treaty with Israel. At the same time, he goes into the rebuilt temple of Jerusalem. He sits on a throne and he demands that the Jews and all the people on planet Earth worship him, the Antichrist, as he sits on a throne in the rebuilt temple in Jerusalem. And he demands that the Jews and the world worships him. He also demands that the Jews stop the animal sacrifices. This is 3.5 years into the tribulation period. This is totally unacceptable to the Jews. They realize that the Antichrist is a false Christ. He's a false Messiah, and he's betrayed them. It's a total betrayal. And then the Antichrist and his armies begin to hunt down the Jews, kill them, slaughter them. God supernaturally protects the Jews. So then there's a transition period. After the 3.5 years where the Antichrist betrays Israel, we move from what's called the tribulation period, the first 3.5 years, to what's called the Great Tribulation period, the second 3.5 years. When you look at the judgments and the intensity of judgments between the first 3 years of the tribulation period and the second 3.5 years of what's known as the Great Tribulation period, the second 3.5 years, or the Great Tribulation period, has monumental, cataclysmic, global, catastrophic judgments that shake the whole earth. Okay, it's like everything, the whole earth shudders and trembles. The Antichrist is pursuing the Jews to kill them and wipe them out. God makes a way of escape for the Jews. They end up hiding in this heavily fortified rock city in Petra, where the Antichrist and his forces can't bomb them or get to them. And then, during that last 3.5 years, national Israel comes to this spiritual revelation. The spiritual deception fades from their eyes, and it dawns upon them that this Christ that they rejected, they have a national revival, and they recognize that Jesus Christ, who they rejected, is actually their Messiah, Yeshua. And all of Israel, or the majority of Israel, has an awakening where they realize that Jesus is their Messiah, and they weep for him as one weeps for a long-lost son. And there's a revival in Israel as they worship Yeshua, or Jesus, or the Messiah as their God. This is very powerful, okay? It's very powerful. Now, then at the end of the 3.5-year tribulation period, Christ comes down from heaven at the second coming, along with the armies of heaven. He descends on the valley of Megiddo, which is right next to Jerusalem. And in the valley of Megiddo, the Bible predicts that the world's last war and greatest battle will be fought, the Battle of Armageddon, which is being fought in the valley of Megiddo between God and God's angels, all the followers of God, all the angels of God are waging war with Satan, all the fallen angels, the Antichrist, the false prophet, and all those who have accepted the mark of the beast are fighting against Christ and the armies of heaven and the angels of God. It's this all-out war. And then finally, to show you how deceived planet Earth is, because they're under the spell of the Antichrist, all the armies of the earth descend upon Jerusalem or attack. They go to Megiddo. All the armies of the earth, all the armies of all the nations of the earth are so deceived, they then use all their advanced weaponry to fight against Jesus Christ descending upon the earth at the second coming. So you can imagine the futuristic weapons that are being fired at Jesus at the second coming as all the armies of the earth unite to fight against Christ at a second coming. Christ defeats the Antichrist, Satan, the false prophet, all those who accepted the mark of the beast. Christ destroys all the armies that are fighting against him. Jesus Christ is King of Kings and Lord of Lords. He then rules and reigns planet Earth from planet Earth's new capital, which is Jerusalem, the new capital of planet Earth. And Jesus Christ rules all of Earth from Jerusalem with his co-ruler or co-regent, King David, in fulfillment of the Davidic covenant. So, where does this take us? This takes us to a very interesting place in terms of this peace treaty, because this peace treaty, and we don't know how it's going to be constructed, et cetera, or if it will go through. There are so many variables here, but we do know this. As this peace treaty is being constructed, however it plays out, we are getting closer and closer and closer to the return of Jesus Christ, and we're getting closer and closer to the coming of the Antichrist and the false prophet. We're getting closer and closer to Armageddon, and then we're getting closer and closer to the second coming of Jesus Christ. There's no way to look at everything that's lining up and not notice God's prophetic plan all over it. I mean, it's mind-blowing. This is Paul McGuire. Send this program to somebody who needs to understand what's happening, the signs of the times. Visit paulmcguire.us and take advantage of all our free resources. Get yourself a copy of The Greatest Battle for the Hearts and Minds of Mankind in the History of the World. It deals with this topic and other topics. It's a must read. You need to read it. You need to get it. And remember, it is now more imperative, more important than ever for us to go into all the world and preach the gospel, for us to preach the gospel in the United States. People's hearts are opening. You may think they're hardening. Yes, some people's hearts are hardening, but most people's hearts are softening. People are looking at what's going on. They have unrest. They're confused. And it makes them open, receptive to hearing the gospel of Jesus Christ. So don't be deceived that there happens to be a noisy percentage of angry people. The larger percentage are crying out to God, or at least open to God. So we need to take advantage of this, because Jesus said that the fields were white with harvest, and they are. So we need to go forward and bring in this last day's soul harvest by preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ. That's the purpose of this ministry, Paul McGuire Ministries in Paradise Mountain Church. That's what we're all about. So I thank God for you, and I need you, because this is spiritual warfare, to pray for me, the ministry, and my family for reasons I mentioned in the beginning of the program. Thank you for being intercessory prayer warriors and partners with me. I need you to spread these programs far and wide. And thank you for being obedient. And finally, spiritual warfare, evangelism, reaching people for Christ, spreading revival, teaching and preaching the unadulterated Word of God requires financial support. We have to get on other channels, other forms of distribution, and we have to get on very soon. And this is a major financial undertaking, but it will allow us to move from reaching a certain number of people. It will allow us to reach millions of people with the gospel of Jesus Christ in the unique format that we present the gospel with. But here's the challenge. There is a tremendous amount of energy and money being spent to shut down many platforms of social media, video, radio, TV, through censorship, through rigging of the internet, through crashing people's sites. There's a full-on war against the truth. And it's kind of laying low now because of where we are in the season of things. But after this season is over, the masks are going to come off, and they are going to go for the jugular and try to take down and remove voices that proclaim the gospel of Jesus Christ. You need to understand that. Therefore, we need to be proactive, and we need to be able to have the monies to not only strengthen Paradise Mountain Church so we can do live broadcasts from the church services, and the ministry and the teaching. We need to strengthen that. Okay? We need to strengthen and expand the studio, and we need to expand. If you notice, if you look at episodic TV, every time you turn around, there's a new station, Hulu, and there's so many, I can't even keep up to the names with them. The Google Channel, the Apple TV. I mean, every time you turn around, there's a new secular outlet for movies, secular comedy shows, comedy shows, secular action drama, etc., etc. There's a new outlet for them. Okay, but here's the problem. While there's an ever-ending new outlets, I just saw one the other day. I can't even remember what the name of it. I never even heard of it. And they're offering some big movie. It's like an imitation of Hulu and some of the others. That gives all those people a vast number of new platforms to communicate whatever message they want to. But you have this increasing censorship, this increasing shutdown of truth on the other hand. And unless we're proactive, and to be proactive, You have to have the additional finances. In some cases, it's very expensive to purchase the new platforms that are becoming available, because new platforms are becoming available. If you get in on time, which means you have the money to lock in your place, you can secure and get on these platforms. Okay, by getting on these platforms, you can reach millions of people with the truth and the gospel of Jesus Christ. All right, tremendously more impactful. But if you're not able to move quick enough and strategically enough, what will happen, and this is my concern for this ministry, but other people's ministries also, is that they intend to shut down a lot of Christian ministries. So you have to have it already set up, new platforms already operational, that you've already paid for, it's like buying real estate. Except we're not buying real estate. We're buying platforms. We're buying technology, which enables us to communicate the gospel of Jesus Christ in our unique way, but have platforms that can reach millions of people, but you're doing it to protect yourself from being taken down as well. See, if you don't really have a choice, I'm being very blunt. If you don't purchase the new technological platforms that are available, okay, if you don't get in on it when let's compare it to real estate. If you don't buy it while there's still properties left, I'm talking about media properties, then you're out. Somebody who wants to do a Hindu meditation channel has bought that platform, or some, whatever, some message that that is not preaching life in the gospel of Jesus Christ. So this is the most critical time. I say more Bible prophecy is exploding to life right now than ever before in the history of the world. But the majority of the church has a complete eclipse on the whole thing, like it doesn't exist. So we have more Bible prophecy happening than ever before. We have more news-related events which prove Bible prophecy. But now we must have all the platforms that we can acquire while they're still inexpensive, while they're still cheap, to be blunt. And to get on them and to be secure, because that does two things. That keeps ministries from being taken down by big tech companies that don't want to hear what you have to say. And it gives you protection and a platform to keep preaching the truth, to keep preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ, but it also gives you access to reach millions of people, not only in the United States and around the world. This is critical. This is absolutely critical that we move fast, decisively, and intelligently. There are other things that we're involved in that I simply can't talk about publicly, but things that would make your heart rejoice. Okay, that would make your heart rejoice. But we need to function together as one in the body of Christ. So I thank God for each and every one of you. I thank God for your faithfulness, your giving, your prayers, your sending of the links. I'm truly humbled. Really, I am. And I'm thankful for that. And I ask you to continue to pray for me, my family, the ministry. Without your prayers, look, we are in spiritual warfare. Without your prayers, I couldn't do what I'm doing. Without your partnership, I couldn't do what I'm doing and spreading links and stuff. Without your obedience to the Lord in being generous and making financial donations and financial contributions to help us accomplish the goal of winning souls, we won't be able to bring in the soul harvest. So I am thankful, really thankful for every one of you that give, because I know it's a sacrifice financially, who spread the links, who are prayer warriors. We do this together. We do this together. This is a principle that God opened up in His Word. You look at the story of Babylon. Their hearts were evil. They wanted to be like Lucifer. But they had power, God said, because they were operating in one accord, unified with one purpose. What God was telling us there is that when any time a people, whether for evil or for good, whenever humanity gathers together in one purpose, one mind, unified, God says there's nothing they can't accomplish, even if it's for evil. But God gave us that principle not just to terrify us about how evil can be evil. What God was trying to say by putting it in His Word is, if the devil's children can accomplish so much by being unified and functioning as one, God was saying, quite like in neon letters, man, how much more can my people do if they will function as one, if they will be unified and have one purpose? God is saying in that passage that there is nothing that you and I can purpose to do that will be withheld from us. There's nothing we can't achieve for God and something that God wants if we're operating in true, not fake Christian unity, true Christian unity of one purpose and one mind. There's power there. And so I encourage you to discover that. I'm not talking about false ecumenical unity. That's evil. So you can do more things than you possibly can imagine if you harness this principle in your personal life, your family life, your business, whatever. And as a partner with this ministry, Paul McGuire Ministries in Paradise Mountain Church, there's nothing that we cannot do if we function according to those precepts. We really need to believe that. All things are possible with God. God bless you. I'm Paul McGuire. Visit paulmcguire.us. That's paulmcguire.us. And join me at the Paradise Mountain Church meeting Thursday, 6 p.m. sharp. Go to paulmcguire.us for directions and map and all the rest of that. God bless you. I'm Paul McGuire.